So then I'm actually uh, was given the term co-think. Okay, so and I think in a way the this idea of co-thinking is that we really need to we're facing such problems that we now have to really this idea of taking risk into opportunities, and that means we have to really go to the basis of what we're thinking and more to the cognitive models that we use in our head. But as we heard all through these morning sessions, we have to do it collectively. So it's not just about our individual thinking, but also about collective thinking. So when I was preparing the presentation, I said, well, let's ask Google what they think about thinking. And it was really, really interesting that the kind of the keywords that they use, that we're talking about critical, strategic, design, wishful, and lateral. That's the kind of things that, if we really want to rethink, we have to be thinking, critically. We have to be very strategic because we revisiting how we think because we possibly are facing problems. And then sometimes that introduces elements of imagination and more visionary thinking, so we can actually look for different solutions. Okay, so how did we do it in the REXUS project? Basically, we developed three tools. One was really about, and this actually comes very often when we think about organizational change, about the mission, vision, values, and in a way we develop a kind of bundle of three tools that basically can help us do this co-thinking or rethinking. So the first one was about thinking together. So we developed something called the Learning Action Alliances, which is also implemented in a sister project, a sister Prima project. And basically what we did here is that we kind of provided a space where stakeholders and partners could collaborate throughout the project lifetime to support the development of this capacity in relation to the nexus. So this included production of guidelines, the development of actually a virtual platform, and then the kind of more facilitated support to the different pilots. So, for example, this had both a physical element where we actually had workshops along all the case studies that we had in the REXUS project, and we also had a platform, a space where they could meet and they could actually share information and basically provide them the support, to each individual project, each individual case study. I think I'm thinking of the first presentation we had from Pier Paolo, and I think you've made me think actually about kind of considering what we did. I think we would probably fit a little bit on the research-led and possibly moving more also to the co-design from the user perspective. And these tools that I'm going to present now go in that direction. So these LAA platforms, I think what was also we were quite proud is that each case study had their own kind of repository to work together, well, across the case studies, but also individually with the different stakeholders. So then the other tool that we developed is a visioning tool, which was really about developing a shared vision. So the kind of tools that I'm presenting are quite complementary, I think, from what I've heard before. Before we had a lot of tools that are about models or designing, information apps. These are much softer tools that when you're really dealing with people. So the first question is, why do we need a vision? When we're talking in this case, we're focusing on the nexus. Because if we don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. So I think it's this idea of developing a kind of way of thinking together about where people are going. So we developed one of the objectives when we started off the project, and we did it, in fact, we implemented it in all the case studies that we had, was to develop these inclusive and sustainable visions for all the stakeholders involved in the project. So we had a conceptual framework. Is this kind of very much linked also to the IPCC and the idea of scenarios and socioeconomic pathways, and we had, the business as usual, or basically how you would need to find a set of actions to get to what would be, your sustainable future or your desired future. And this is something that you have to, as Jaime said earlier, you have to make it explicit. You have to actually work on this. You cannot assume that, with data is the same. You need to actually have the data to know what is actually happening. The same with stakeholders. You need to actually engage them so they can actually, through a process which is facilitated in this case, then they can actually think about the different scenarios and the different pathways that they could do with the local economy, depending on how they use the different resources. So we developed a visioning tool, which is more. It looks a little bit more like a board game rather than a computer game. So we had a series of cards that were looking at resources, socioeconomic activities, and basically this is something that then we had on a table, on a large table, where basically it was very hands-on with the stakeholders, which I think they actually really enjoyed, because it's kind of more quite social when you're doing these workshops. And then this is actually, we had the step one where we basically defined the problem collectively with them, what is actually the Nexus challenge that they were going to be dealing with, and they had to work on this. Before, often we actually had done elite interviews, so we already had prepared the ground before we actually went into doing the workshop. Then in the second step, we were actually talking about the development of a sustainable vision, where we will start from now, 2024, and through this process of developing a collective vision, we were trying to really make it explicit for the stakeholders involved. Where did they actually want to end up? So this graph that I showed earlier, there's a number of scenarios, a number of places where you could end up. And through this process, what you're basically doing is you're creating, your kind of, it's almost like I'm not going to say conflict resolution, but you're trying to anticipate, where is the common ground and the shared goals that the different stakeholders that often have, inherent conflicts between the use of resources, where they could actually find more win-win strategies. And then the final step of the vision is basically to develop, this kind of roadmap of how they get there. So then you go into the future. In our case, we went all the way to 2050. To then, which is actually quite important from at least for the European Union. This was mainly the case studies were in the European Union. Of course, we have so many policies now that have very clear targets, like, for example, the Fit for 55 on decarbonization, the farm to fork, the water framework. There's all these kind of legal requirements of what you have to do, which puts constraints in the system. And therefore, then you have to work out how you're going to get, from now to 2050, knowing that you already have a lot of constraints into what you can actually do. And then just to say that this tool was linked, there were other partners in the projects that were doing system dynamic models. At one point, another partner developed a more like agent-based model and a game. So basically, we were trying to make sure that these soft tools then were part of this toolbox that then could be used, to link up the tools that were being produced by REXUS. Okay, and then the final tool that we developed, and I think that this is actually the one that probably was a bit more different, and it's something that I think we really, really want to work a lot more, because we think that what we saw was quite powerful. But I'll be quite quick, in presenting it. We developed a tool which is much more about making explicit the values of the different stakeholders. Quite often, when we think about the fact that decisions are not made, we have all the legal frameworks you can imagine, and then voila, they're not implemented. And the question is, why not? And we wanted to actually, for the first time, talk about the elephants in the room, which is basically talk about power. Power and the fact that when all these people are coming to the meeting, when we're doing the visions, when we're doing, even when we're in this shared platform of the Learning Action Alliances, all the actors do not have the same power. They don't come equally to the table. And we need to make this explicit, because otherwise, those visions could be quite skewed depending on the more powerful actor, or even if they agree a vision in the terms of implementation, because of power and interest, these things actually might not be achieved. So we actually really wanted to look at the Nexus governance. We think that this actually is a really important area, which is sometimes quite difficult because it's quite soft, so it's a lot harder to actually go into. And we wanted to basically develop a tool to help us understand better the enabling environment for the Nexus governance. And therefore, as I said earlier, we wanted to uncover and make explicit these power dynamics, which often explain the barriers to implementation. So we developed a toolkit for the assessment of what we call a political economy analysis that then we could actually implement in a few pilots. So why a political economy analysis? What is it? Basically, what you do, and as I say, is kind of more of a framing tool. You analyze the economic and political context of a region to understand, why you could or could not implement a nexus approach. It means that you focus on the formal and the informal factors. You also make explicit actors and their power. And you also, in our case, it was particularly interesting because, of course, it was a nexus project. So we had to look, on the one hand, at the nexus and how the different sectors interact with each other, and also at each sector. So it was even more complex than normally just doing a political economy analysis on one area with one sector. This actually brought the level of complexity quite high, but it was actually probably even more interesting because of that. One of the things that we also knew we had to do is to develop a tool that is quite flexible and that it really brings participation of the different stakeholders. To us, this was actually a must. Flexibility, because these tools, all of the ones I've presented, have to be adaptable. Because the context, for example, in say when we were dealing in Spain or where you went all the way to the Danube, even on the scale, were completely different. So we needed to be very adaptable. So then I'm just showing the elements. It's a kind of modular tool that basically had three elements. Again, a little bit like with the vision, before we went to do this workshop, we already had actually done some elite interviews to prepare the ground a little bit. So we had a bit of input. But basically, it had three parts. The first one is where we look at the country level, and we look basically at what factors influence the politics and the decision making. And here we were really trying to make explicit the normative elements, the values of the different actors when they come to the table. We then also wanted to of course, understand the actors, the type of power, and the power relations between the sectors. So, for example, just to give you an insight, we asked the three sectors, in their opinion, which sector was the most powerful, the one that had, and it was very interesting in the one we tried in Spain at the national level, where we had basically people relatively high level from the ministries and from energy companies and from farming organizations, big irrigation communities like in Doñana, which is a very complex case. Basically, what we could see is they all agreed that energy was the most powerful sector, and then with water and agriculture, it was kind of different reasons why one in some cases was more powerful. And this to us was really interesting, the way you're making explicit, and then you have to ask them, okay, why is that the case? Why is energy within the sectors, the one that really has more power? And then finally, we also look at the formal and informal rules about how to make, because the informal aspects quite often are hidden, like the iceberg, it's actually what goes on underneath. And that often can really explain why things are happening. Then finally, on the second part, we didn't look at the intersectorial. We then really zoom into each sector to understand the political economy in that sector in relation to the others. So then we were getting a deeper analysis. And then the final part is the roadmap. And of course, this then links up to the other tool we did on the vision. You see, so then the idea is that these tools are supposed to work together. So for example, as an example, and I'm just showing results because, we don't have that long. On the water case, for example, we did, they decided, as a group, they decided on what the challenges they wanted to tackle. They identified sustainable investment in water as a key element, diffuse pollution and water scarcity. And then what we did, which I think was quite interesting, we then took that national level challenge definition, and then we went to the Júcar Basin, and then we asked the River Basin Agency, if we choose the problem of diffuse pollution, we want to use this political economy analysis. Can we think of a case when we can really go a lot lower into almost like the lowest possible level to apply this tool at the local level? And that's exactly what we did. We found a case study to implement, with diffuse pollution. We went to Palma de Gandia, which is a municipality in the region of Valencia, in the Júcar Basin, which is basically having huge problems with diffuse pollution because water is no longer drinkable because of health reasons. So they're having to have water delivered to them every Tuesday and Thursday. And we then did a very detailed, concrete workshop with farmers and the municipality to try to understand how we could move forward on a collective roadmap with the farmers and the municipality, and of course the higher level of the River Basin Agency. And I think this is almost my last slide. Okay, let's see if it goes through. No, it's not moving. Right. Okay, 1 second. Yeah. So then, just to end here, I think this concept of co-thinking that I was asked to think about for this workshop is really about thinking about the future decisions, which basically helps you decide on the actions now. And therefore, it can really helps you navigate this very complex landscape. And with that, I think if, yep.